The room is loud before anyone speaks. You can feel it, that specific electricity in the air when two people are about to collide. The jaw tightening, the breath shortening, the eyes narrowing into something that stopped being human the moment it became a fight. Words are loading like weapons, and both people, absolutely convinced of their own righteousness, step forward into the fire. Now freeze that scene. Hold it exactly there. Because what you're looking at isn't a conversation. It isn't even a conflict. What you're looking at is a courtroom. And here is the first uncomfortable truth you need to hear. In this courtroom, both sides are already guilty. Not of being wrong, guilty of something far more damaging. Guilty of caring so much about being seen as right that they handed their power to a stranger the moment they opened their mouths. This is what Epictetus understood about human beings, that most people spend their entire lives never grasping. The argument was never about the argument. It never is. Think about the last time you truly argued with someone. Not a calm disagreement. An argument, something that made your pulse climb and your thoughts race and your chest fill with that righteous burning need to make them understand. Now ask yourself honestly, what were you actually fighting for? The truth? The facts? Or something deeper and more fragile than either of those things? Your identity. Your worth. The terrifying possibility that if they don't agree with you, then maybe, just maybe, something about you is wrong. That's the trap. That's always been the trap. Epictetus was born with nothing, less than nothing. He was born a slave, owned by another man, his body not his own, his future not his own, his very name assigned to him by someone else. And yet this man, this person who by every external measure had no power at all, arrived at an understanding of power so precise, so devastating in its clarity, that it has outlasted every empire that existed during his lifetime. He didn't discover it in a library. He didn't inherit it from wealth or status. He found it in the only place it was impossible for anyone to take from him, inside. The Stoics had a word for it, prohairesis. Your faculty of choice, the inner citadel, the part of you that no external force, no master, no critic, no opponent can ever truly reach without your permission. And once Epictetus understood that, once he truly felt the weight of that idea in his bones, something remarkable happened. He stopped needing to prove anything to anyone, not because he became passive, not because he became cold or indifferent, but because he saw with perfect clarity what arguments actually are and what they cost. Here is what the courtroom reveals when you study it forensically. Every argument has a prosecutor and a defendant, but the roles keep switching so fast that both participants lose track of which they are. What begins as a disagreement about a fact becomes a trial about character. What starts as a debate about a decision becomes an excavation of old wounds. Within minutes, neither person is talking about the original subject anymore. They are talking about being dismissed, about being underestimated, about every time someone didn't listen, didn't respect, didn't acknowledge. The argument is just a door. And through that door walks everything that person has ever needed to defend about themselves. This is why arguments feel so urgent, so viscerally necessary, because on some level, the person arguing genuinely believes that if they lose this exchange, something essential about them is diminished. They believe their worth is on trial, and so they fight, not for the point, but for the verdict. And Epictetus would look at that person with quiet and absolute clarity and say, "You have already lost," not because their argument was weak, not because their pargument was weak, not because their facts were wrong, but because the moment you need someone else's agreement to feel secure, you have placed your peace in a prison that other people hold the keys to. Every single time someone disagrees with you, and you feel that surge of anxiety, that desperate need to correct them, to convince them, to make them see, that is not strength responding. That is fear. The prosecution never rests because the fear never rests. Now here is where the forensic examination gets deeply unsettling. Because if you look closely at the psychology of argument, and I mean really look, past the surface of who said what and who was louder and who made the better point, you begin to see a pattern that almost no one wants to acknowledge. The people who argue the hardest are almost never arguing about the subject in front of them. They are arguing about a story they have been telling themselves for years, a story about what they deserve, about how they should be treated, about the gap between who they believe they are and how the world appears to be responding to them. Every argument is a closing argument in a trial that started long before this room, long before this relationship, long before the specific moment of friction. The other person didn't start the trial. They just happened to walk into a courtroom that was already built. This is why winning an argument rarely feels as satisfying as it should. You expected relief. You expected resolution. Instead, there is this hollow, slightly exhausted feeling. Because the verdict came in and somehow it still didn't close the case. The wound that sent you into the courtroom is still open. It will be open again tomorrow. And there will be another argument. And another. The cycle doesn't end because the cycle was never about the other person. Epictetus taught his students something that felt almost offensive in its simplicity. Concern yourself only with what is within your control. Your judgments, your desires, your responses. Everything else, what people think of you, what they say about you, whether they agree with you, whether they respect you, none of that belongs to you. None of it is yours to manage. And the moment you try to manage it, you have surrendered the only thing that actually was yours. There is a specific kind of person you have encountered in your life. You may not have had language for them at the time, but you have felt their presence. They do not raise their voice. They do not scramble to correct every mischaracterization. When someone speaks over them, they don't erupt. They wait, or they say nothing at all. When they are criticized, they consider it without theater. When they are provoked, something in them simply doesn't catch. You may have mistaken this for weakness when you first encountered it. Many people do. They look at the silence and assume there is nothing behind it. No fire. No strength. Just passivity. They are wrong, and they usually figure that out too late. That stillness is not emptiness. That silence is not surrender. It is the external expression of someone who has done the internal work, someone who no longer needs the courtroom because they have already ruled on every charge from the inside. Their identity does not require your verdict. Their peace does not require your agreement. Their direction does not require your permission. They have located their power somewhere you cannot reach it. And because of that, they cannot be baited, rattled, destabilized, or diminished by the friction that consumes everyone else. This is the person who walks into any room and commands it without demanding it. This is the most powerful person in the building, and they are almost never the loudest one in it. Think about every manipulation tactic ever devised. Every method humans use to control one another. Provocation, humiliation, public challenges, rumors, criticism. What do all of them require to work? A response. They are all invitations into a courtroom. And every time you accept the invitation, every time you feel compelled to defend yourself, explain yourself, justify yourself, you validate the premise that your worth is something that can be put on trial. You hand the gavel to someone who was never qualified to hold it. Epictetus spent years in chains. He understood what it meant to have your external circumstances completely beyond your control. And from inside that absolute powerlessness, he built a philosophy of absolute power, not power over others. He had no interest in that. Power over the one thing that could never be taken, himself. When he was eventually freed, he did not seek revenge. He did not demand acknowledgement. He did not construct elaborate arguments to explain what had been done to him and why he deserved better. He had already processed all of that, in silence, in private, in the place no master could enter. He walked out of slavery without carrying it with him, because he had long since refused to let anyone else define what he carried. That is the freedom that silence protects, not the silence of those who have nothing to say, the silence of those who have already decided, deeply, privately, without needing a witness, who they are and what they stand for. The silence that is not an absence, but a fullness. a completeness that does not require the world's confirmation to remain whole. The trial is always being called to order. Every day, in small and large ways, someone will say something designed to get you into that courtroom. A dismissive comment, an unfair accusation, a condescending tone, a challenge to your intelligence, your choices, your character. And every single time, you will feel the pull. The animal urgency to stand up, to speak, to make your case, to win. In that moment, remember the man who owned nothing and understood everything. Close the court. Walk out of the building. The most powerful verdict you will ever deliver is the one you deliver in silence. The one that says, I already know who I am, and I don't need you to confirm it.